Penn State head football coach Joe Paterno comes into tonight's game with close to 400 wins and is the all-time winningest coach in FBS history. Paterno, who is in his 45th year at Penn State, was inducted into the College Hall of Fame in 2007. That makes him one of only 3 coaches that are still coaching that are already in the Hall of Fame. No question about it. When you say Joe Pa, people young and old respect this coaching icon.
Obviously, Coach Paterno is a guy who is greatly respected among all generations.
He's a great coach.
He's been around for quite some time, long before even my dad was playing college football.
Everybody on this team has a great amount of respect for him, and we know that he's accomplished some great things over the years.
The way he's brought up that program since he's been there is great, so I'm looking forward to playing against Penn State.
If I get the opportunity to shake his hand or reach out and just touch him maybe, I'm definitely going to take full advantage of it. I'm going to go for a hug. I'm going to...
Well, I hope when I'm 83, I'm still as young and spry as Joe Paterno is.
Our first guest this morning has reported for USA Today, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and Newsday. During his storied career, he interviewed some of the biggest names in sports, covered Super Bowls, Final Fours, Olympic Games, National Championship football games. And today, Malcolm Moran is the Knight Chair in Sports Journalism and the director of the John Curley Center for Sports Journalism at Penn State, and he joins us now live on the program. Malcolm, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Gary. I do have one correction to make. Apparently there's been some speculation that Joe had something to do with the demise of the dinosaurs. It didn't happen that way, but he did tell them no turnovers and watch out for that meteor.
Okay. Glad we cleared that up.
For the record.
I want to ask you, before we get into football specifically, this esteemed journalism career has now led you into instructing young journalists. How did that come about at Penn State?
Well, Penn State was the first institution to start a Center for Sports Journalism in '03. And then in '05, the Knight Foundation awarded an endowment to Penn State to create a chair in sports journalism and society. And I read the release that Penn State issued, and I thought, that could be me, which is a very long way from a search committee saying that could be him.
Right.
But that's really how it started, and it's been very rewarding.
All right, now that you're at Penn State, you've seen it from afar, working for the New York Times and other papers. Now you're right there in Happy Valley. 10 years ago, folks were ready to run Joe Paterno off. And I think he even said 5 years ago, so I need to have a good year, or I'm going to take my rear end on out of here. He won 11 games in 2005, and since that time, they've been contenders every year. It's amazing at his age that he can still make the adjustments needed to stay on top of the coaching profession.
And that he has the energy level that's required. He's 83 years old. And people, going back to the Big Ten media days in Chicago, people noted that he began to sound like he's older. Well, he is. But in the last few years, he's overcome a hip injury that required a hip replacement and a knee injury when he got the helmet on the knee in Madison in '06 that had 2 torn knee ligaments and a fracture, and he's still going.
Yeah, going strong. Certainly a coaching icon, another coaching icon, another living legend when he was alive was Bear Bryant. Interesting story. In 1979, you came down here to interview Coach Bryant. You got to sit in that infamous couch that sunk you right down. You felt like you were staring up at
nobody
God.
warned me about.
Oh, you didn't know about it?
No, and I just kept going.
Yeah.
And and it was almost as if I was sitting on the floor, looking up over the edge of the desk, as if it's the Wizard of Oz. And then I discovered that I don't know what he's saying. I mean, I can't understand what he's saying. So it was a panic-stricken situation. But the thing that saved me was, at the end, I said, Coach, I really appreciate your time. And sometimes things come up after the fact. Would it be okay if I give you a call? He said, fine. He could not have been more kind. And I called him back the next day and asked all the same questions.
And could understand him.
And his telephone voice was perfect. And so I survived. But I'll always remember how kind he was to me.
And a great story in the New York Times about that meeting with Coach Bryant. Real quickly, the game tonight, how do you see it?
Rob Bolden, you don't want to put too much on a true freshman, but the thing that impressed me last week, aside from the statistical part of it, he looked like he had been there before. He got them in and out of the huddle efficiently. I don't remember once looking at the play clock and wondering, are they going to get it off? No false starts, no illegal motion. His bearing and the way he managed the game was as impressive as anything, and obviously this is going to be a different type of challenge.
But we know this, a lot of talk about him being a freshman. Joe Paterno would not have put him under center last week if he wasn't the best guy for the job.
Well, and you could see how he rewarded the performance of Bolden.
Right.
I mean, I had heard during preseason camp that he was distancing himself from the others at the position. And who knows, depending on how things go today, this could be looked as the beginning of the Rob Bolden era.
Absolutely. Good stuff. It's been an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Malcolm Moran. John?
All right, Gary, thank you very much. And time now for some of the other games going on around the SEC today. And today, the Ole Miss Rebels head down to New Orleans to face Tulane. Coach Houston Nutt has had the difficult task this week of trying to keep his team together after last week they suffered an embarrassing loss to an FCS opponent, Jacksonville State.
You know, just a bitter taste in your mouth. And, you know, you don't expect something like that to happen. It reach up and bite you. It's a tough turnaround. It's a very tough turnaround. But like I say, I'm glad that we went on the field. I'm glad that we got the film watched. You put it away, put it to bed, and you go.
Florida won their game last week, but didn't look pretty doing it. The offense certainly did not resemble the offense of the last 4 years under Tim Tebow. Coach Urban Meyer says growing pains are part of football, and it's all about how you respond to them.
Mistakes and urgency to correct mistakes, that's part of the game. That's what you got to do. So now the bottom line is get it fixed, and I imagine with the trust of our staff and our players that we will get most of those things fixed.
And one of the bigger showdowns in the SEC this weekend happens in Columbia. Georgia will travel to face South Carolina minus star receiver A.J. Green, who has been suspended by the NCAA for 4 games. This matchup has traditionally been very close on the scoreboard.
I can't imagine it's going to be anything different than what we've had, which is very, very close games. Point differential usually within 7 points of each other. I think 7 out of 9 times that I've been at Georgia. You know, I hope it doesn't take a heroic act at the end to win, but more than likely it will, and we need to be prepared for 60 minutes.
That game slated for 11 a.m., the early game in the SEC today. There you see the rest of the schedule on your screen. The big game, of course, Alabama and Penn State tonight at 6 o'clock. Now for a look at the weather around the SEC, here's Richard Scott.
Hey, John, yeah, we know the weather around here is hot, but let's talk about some other games happening across the SEC. We're talking some hot conditions over for Georgia and South Carolina. Let's go over and show you the graphics there, what's happening with the game there. Georgia, South Carolina, 11 o'clock in the morning, the kickoff time. 81 degrees, partly cloudy skies. A straight storm for that game, but we head over to South Florida, and Florida playing this afternoon, this morning into this afternoon. Kickoff time, 11:21. Again, a straight storm is possible, but we may have some problems with LSU and Vanderbilt. In fact, we're talking conditions at 6 p.m. at kickoff. Thunderstorms likely, 85 degrees. We're back in the upper 70s to end things off. And finally, Oregon playing Tennessee at Tennessee. A rough forecast for you as well. A lot of storms in the southeast. We're talking temperatures at halftime around 81 degrees, upper 70s to end things. And you know what, John and Gary, we're talking thunderstorms around here. Of course, we've got much more in your forecast. Your local forecast is coming up.
Thanks, Richard, and still a lot more to do this morning on Crimson Tide Kickoff.
Absolutely. Coming up in the second half hour, we'll talk with ESPN's Brad Edwards and get his take on tonight's big game. Can Penn State mount a challenge with their freshman quarterback? You heard Malcolm Moran say this guy's a gamer. And how effective will Alabama be without a couple of their big playmakers on each side of the football? Stick around. We're just getting cranked up good on Crimson Tide Kickoff. There's a live shot of Bryant-Denny Stadium. Stay with us.
And welcome back to Crimson Tide Kickoff. You know, we're going to get back to talking about football, Alabama football, and sports in just a moment. But first, we did want to take a minute and acknowledge that this is the 9th anniversary of 9/11. We understand that this is a sports show, and that's what you've tuned in to see, but we did feel that it was appropriate and, quite frankly, the right thing to do to take a minute and acknowledge this.
Absolutely, John, without a doubt. This morning, all over the country, there are ceremonies going on to remember those who lost their lives in the terrorist attacks 9 years ago. What you're seeing here is a live look at a ceremony in New York City being held in the park just across the street from Ground Zero. All morning, family members will be reading the names of those who perished in the World Trade Center attacks. They're also observing 4 moments of silence at the exact times of when the two planes hit the towers and when each tower collapsed. Ceremonies are also underway at both the Pentagon to remember those who died there and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania to remember those brave Americans who died on Flight 93. And locally, there are several remembrance ceremonies planned, including one at the football game. Fans will be asked to observe a moment of silence following the national anthem, John.
And Gary, we're going to take a break, and don't touch that dial. We're just getting started here on Crimson Tide Kickoff. We got the second half hour coming up in just a moment, including ESPN's Brad Edwards. We'll be right back.